Well, hello and welcome to Making Waves to Move to Joy. This is a series of mini webinars where Johanna and Marie get real about the ebb and flow of finding lasting joy and happiness as women and as leaders. So as we go through this series, we will be unpacking some of the top reasons that women leaders struggle to find joy by sharing our stories, exploring some of the lessons we have learned to recapture that joy, and how you might be able to apply those lessons to reignite your joy. And so as a formal reminder, this webinar is being recorded.
Wonderful. And for those attending live, we posted a question in the chat. And as we get started, we'd actually love to hear from all of you about what is the one thing that has brought you joy in the last week. Now, we won't call anyone out by name or have you talk. We just want you to share some joy with everyone in the chat. And for me, my one thing that has brought me joy in the past week and actually in the past few months is a book club. Gathering 12 midlife, mid-career women, sharing the opportunity to come together and the joy of reading. We gathered at a local brew pub to discuss our latest book, The Last Letter. And it's a dual love for me of supporting a local business and joining together with a community to support one another. How about you, Marie?
So for me, my sister, who is an artist, has recently moved to Pennsylvania from Florida, and she is into all things fall. And she's really helping me see colors kind of in a fresh way. And so we spend a lot of time outside looking at leaves, hiking, corn mazes, and some backyard fires. And so from the chat, we've got some people that are enjoying time with friends, time with family, um, exercising, having some time off work, meditation. All of these are fantastic ways to help you rediscover and reignite your joy. And so as we go through this session, we are here to help you get the most value you can from your time. So if you want to understand why you've lost your joy, find a clear path to helping regain that spark, and learn how to sustain it in your work, this video is for you. This webinar is for you today. And you're welcome to type yes in the chat if that is you. And then if diving deep into the emotions isn't for you, we do encourage you to use your valuable time elsewhere. We would not be offended. So we want everyone to really enjoy their time here today. So we have some returning attendees, but we also have quite a few people that are new today. So Johanna, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Johanna Danaher, and I spent 25 years of my career in corporate HR in a large pharmaceutical organization. And now I am an entrepreneur starting my own business focused on leadership development and life and career coaching. And I really support midlife professionals and women leaders who have built meaningful lives and successful careers but might feel like that quiet pull towards something more. So, folks who are standing at a crossroads ready to reimagine what's next, whether that's in retirement or a new role or an expanded leadership position. And then leaders who have really carried the weight for everyone else who are now ready to reclaim their own energy, their own purpose, and find their own joy. And what about you, Marie?
Yeah, so I work with mission driven leaders who have created a great life, but they know there's something more for them, but they aren't sure what's next. And those leaders generally fall into two groups, either established founders who have built a great business, but are now kind of feeling stuck and overwhelmed and wondering why their business now feels like the corporate grind they left behind. And then the other group I work with is aspiring entrepreneurs who are planning their exit from the corporate world. They're ready to launch a business aligned with their purpose, and they want to change that hustle for happiness.
Yeah, so probably some of the things that many of you as our listeners are thinking about. Hopefully you can see yourself in one of those examples. And just what we're going to do over the course of this conversation is, as Marie said before, gain and help you gain some insights into what's blocking your joyful career path. At the end of the session, we'll invite you to join us for a free coffee chat if that's of interest to you, where you can explore your personalized path to joy, whether you're a corporate leader or an entrepreneur. But what we did in our last episode, for those who had joined us then, or for those who are interested in watching the replay on YouTube, we actually talked about feelings of loneliness and the myth of the solo climb. And today we're going to actually dig in a little bit more, right? And talk a lot about emotions, right? And looking at that myth that really does keep us from true connection. And that's the myth of the unemotional professional. So, Marie, let's dig right into some of the stories and the origins of the leave your emotions at the door mentality. And looking back on your career, I'm curious if you could highlight some times that you had been told to check your emotion at the door.
Yeah, so I love this topic because I started in education. Emotions are everywhere. Students, staff, parents, everybody's got like something going on. And then I moved to IT, first in banking and finance, and then in transportation, and emotions weren't really talked about. As an entrepreneur, though, I'm always managing my own emotions through the ups and downs of running a business, right? That entrepreneurial roller coaster. But the thing I love talking about the most is the fact that so often our strongest memories are when emotions were not checked at the door. So for me, I had couple experiences. One in corporate, things had gone sideways on a project. My supervisor was, pounding on the keyboard, wanting to know why did this happen. The project sponsors on a Zoom call actually yelling both at me and at the entire project team about, why did this go sideways? And then I'm just crying, right? I'm literally on this Zoom crying, not just because of the stress, but from those feelings of isolation and perfectionism. And I really felt like I was that lonely island in a sea of blame. But then you contrast that to a time where emotions were managed slightly more appropriately for the workplace. Um, I was under a lot of stress from life. I was in an entrepreneurial workshop for a lead magnet that was really stressing me because I was struggling to do the assignments in this workshop and I had paid for it. So I was really frustrated that I was not doing well. This time, when I started crying in that frustration, I got Zoom chats of support and encouragement, both in the general chat and then in the private messages in the chat. The workshop leader took the few thoughts I'd been able to string together and actually came back the next day and helped me with some great messaging that really helped me take a leap forward in my business. So both times emotions were running high, right? Brought all those emotions. One felt awful and one felt very affirming. So very different experiences. So
Yeah,
what about
yeah,
you,
absolutely.
Johanna?
Thanks, Maria. And what you were highlighting there is that, emotions are constant, right? And it is the experience that we have with them that really defines how those emotions either enable us or hijack us. And for me, early roles actually taught me that emotion was part of the work. I was in a call center, I was in recruiting, I was in hospitality. And in those areas, energy and empathy weren't extras, right? They were really how you de escalated tension, how you built trust quickly, and how you kept people engaged. But when I came back into the corporate environment, that same energy suddenly became too much. I was told I was too passionate, that I needed to be more objective, that I needed to tone it down a bit. The implicit message that I had was that competence equaled composure without visible feeling. And I remembered thinking, wait a minute here, isn't the passion that I bring to the work what makes me good at what I do? And so I really struggled with that message of tone it down, you're too passionate. But over time, I learned that the point wasn't to mute the emotion, it was to channel it in the right way, right? Because emotion is energy in action. And what actually really derailed teams wasn't too much emotion. It was the stuff that sparked the emotion, the eye rolls, the talking over people, maybe a public call out when things are not going well or was derailed. Those are jerk-like behaviors, right? And those sort of trigger an emotion. And the room then reacts. There's tension, there's frustration, there's shutdown. And instead of naming the behavior, and dealing with the emotion, someone says, well, check your emotions at the door. So now the reaction is what's getting policied while the trigger gets a pass, right? So it becomes that loop, the negative behavior, the emotions that we feel, the tone it down, the erosion of trust, and then more bad behavior. And so for me, it's about breaking the cycle, right? How do we name the behaviors? How do we acknowledge, accept the emotions? How do we take a breath and pause? And how do we have a conversation that's about that emotion? Because oftentimes, when that emotion is showing up and when someone's saying, check your emotion, it means I'm actually uncomfortable with your emotion. So it's not about the emotion itself, it's about the fact that others are uncomfortable with the fact that you're feeling that emotion. So it's the conversation that's important.
Yeah, and that's really so critical, right? The fact that we are uncomfortable dealing with those emotions or we don't want to address them. And so they just start to spiral, react, and it can get pretty messy. So for those attending live, we would love for you to share in the chat for us. What emotion have you ever been asked to check at the door or tone down in a professional setting? And again, we're not going to share those, we're not going to call you out, but just to help you start to process, right, as we go through this webinar, where is this showing up for you, either as an entrepreneur or as a corporate leader? So we talked about how it shows up, Johanna. Where did it come from and why do we keep having this conversation in 2025?
So I think this one has, really deep roots, right? It actually goes back to, the industrial era, right? When work was about output and control and not humanity. There was a sort of an image, a post-war image of what it means to be professional, calm, composed, unemotional. Many of us may also have been rewarded for keeping it together, for having the answers, for being able to handle the crisis, for not necessarily having the feelings. So we were rewarded for all of those behaviors, right? And we're rewarded for staying calm under pressure. I mean, that's a phrase probably every single one of us has heard at one point. And I remember when I first became a leader, that message was reinforced. Stay steady, right? You are, you are a leader and you have a long shadow, right? People are looking for you for the signals. So how do you as a leader balance that as well as also acknowledge that you also have emotions that are coming in with you? And I think that what I've learned over time through so much of my work with energy leadership is that actual emotional energy is the quality of our energy, right? It is how we're feeling when we're performing, right? We have these feelings of highly anabolic energy. We are in flow. Our work is feeling like it is almost impossible not to get done, right? There is this high positive quality. But then we might also have a trigger event that happens, and all of a sudden we're still getting stuff done, but it feels a little bit more frenetic. It feels more like surviving, right? Versus performing. And so all of that is important cues for us to be able to be aware of it, but it still feels really vulnerable, right? And I think that's why it still persists. But even though we can acknowledge the emotions that we have to ourselves, it feels risky to be vulnerable and bringing those emotions out in conversations with our teams, with our peers, and with our leaders. So that really is the reason why the myth persists is because of that vulnerability. But I would say that emotion and professionalism aren't opposites. They actually need one another, right? We get our best work done when we are acknowledging how we're feeling. So, Marie, I think the myth has such a hold on us because it was designed to keep us productive. But I think the real magic happens when we can bring both the performance and the emotion. What about you?
Yeah, and I would 100% agree with that. Um, so it's funny, right? Because we do think of that picture, right, of the 1950s with all the guys in their matching short sleeve white shirts and their skinny little ties, and everybody's typing and nobody's talking. But then the other thing it makes me think of is that stiff upper lip, right? We talk about keeping that stiff upper lip. It's actually an American saying from the 1800s, even though we associate it more with the British. But it does have to do with like, right, not bringing that emotion and reacting at work. And we don't keep our emotions separate. We do bring them to work, right? Our own as well as other people's, as you talked about. And in order to actually work with that, and I think part of that origin of that stiff upper lip and this myth is people struggle to manage their emotions themselves. And if you can't understand your own emotions, it's very difficult to manage anybody else's, especially if you're already tapped out because something had happened at home on the way to work that day, whether it's with your spouse or your children or just, anything, right? And if you are already at a low ebb energy wise, and then you're trying to manage your emotions, it is very, very difficult. And so, in order to manage those emotions, one of the things that really helped me was that energy leadership index assessment. And from that quote unquote ELI, that's the shortcut name for it, right? I really started to understand how I react under stress. And it wasn't until I started to really understand my own stress reactions and my own emotions that I was able to start to think about, well, how do I want this to show up in work? How do I want to show up in the office, right? Whether that is a corporate office or an entrepreneur. How do I want to manage all those what we think of as catabolic emotions at work, right? There are some people that are lucky enough to work in a wonderful, supportive environment. Most people do not necessarily feel like they are in that super supportive environment. And so it's only when we can manage our emotions, understand ours, so that we can manage those, not just of people that report to us or people that we report to, but just overall in general across our teams. Um, it's only then when we're managing all of those emotions and understanding them that we can realize that the productivity measures um, really, right, do encompass emotion. And it's interesting because as an entrepreneur, I actually, on my productivity measures, have a happiness line. So it's not just how many clients did I get, what my revenue was, what my outcomes were from a monetary standpoint, but it was what was my happiness score this week? And if we start to think about what our happiness score might be, what is that? And how can we make it higher? So
Yeah.
go ahead, Johanna.
I was going to say I love that, right? Not only for you as an entrepreneur, but for leaders, right? That's definitely an area that in my corporate experience we did assess. We had an engagement survey that did talk about, how are you feeling at work? And as leaders, we often ask those questions of our teams to ensure that we were checking in with people. And I remember, first time for me that this actually came up in the work environment, I had actually had a health diagnosis of celiac disease, and I had a miscarriage, and I was not okay. And I didn't know how to have that conversation with people at work. I didn't know how to, be honest about my emotions. My work started to suffer. I was missing deadlines. I was, sort of snippy in meetings. I was reactionary, and it was because I didn't have the capability, the confidence, and even the words to use in the workplace environment to explain that. And I would default to telling everybody I was fine and shifting to the ability to actually manage the emotions like you were talking about, Marie, started with a manager telling me that my standard answer, I'm fine, was really kind of not okay. They said fine stands for feelings inside not expressed. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. I am not naming my feelings. I am not expressing my emotions. I was hiding them. I was covering them. And so for me, how I started to move away from this sort of myth and unpack the myth and right really move past the myth was talking about the emotion, was getting comfortable being uncomfortable in that conversation. I started naming the emotions out loud. I'm frustrated because I care about getting this right. I started also taking short renewal breaks, a breath before a big meeting, a quick walk to reset, little pauses that actually helped me stay centered and recognize that the emotions were driving me. And I also began asking the question, what is this emotion trying to tell me? Because usually it's not random, it's pointing to a value that really matters. So that's sort of how I've moved past and got the sort of overcoming of the myth of no emotions at work. And I'm curious, Marie, what are some of the things that you've done?
Yeah, so for me, emotion was not dealt with when I was growing up. And so we were very much into logic. I have a father who's a computer programmer. My mother was a chemist. So it was all science all the time, all facts, all logic. And what ended up happening was um, I lost touch with my own emotions. And so no matter how many tips there were, right, that take a deep breath, count to 10, pause, doesn't work if you don't understand your own emotions, which was for me part of the reason it was so powerful taking that energy leadership assessment. And so um, in that coach training, right? It's day 2 of coach training with 30 people I've never met before. I volunteered to be a part of this demonstration for master coaching, and literally 20 minutes into it, I am bawling my eyes out because I realized how far I had become from my own emotions. And that was very eye-opening for me because as I have become much more comfortable with my emotions, all of those tips and tricks that were taught, right? And we'll go over some here at the end of our webinar. All of those actually really all of a sudden make much more sense now. And when we're okay with our own emotions, we can address those things you were talking about. We can talk about the eye rolls. We can talk about, in an appropriate way, why are you so upset? What is going on? How can I help? Why are you saying you're fine when you're really not fine? And so it is messy. It's not a perfect science. For me, it's still uncomfortable. And for most people, dealing with emotions, particularly in the workplace, is still very uncomfortable because we're not taught to do it. We are taught to have that, check your emotions at the door myth. But emotions and intuition are what really separate us from AI. And going forward in the age of AI and technology, it is going to be how we can connect with others, how we can use emotion to really create that community and connection that's going to elevate us. And so for entrepreneurs, they need to do this for themselves and for their team if they have one. We obviously need to do it in organizations, whether those are corporate organizations, educational, or nonprofits, because we really see how things like COVID have impacted our very youngest members of society through schools and what they're going through. So a lot of it is using that intuition, being in touch with the intuition. No, should I probe this emotion now? Should I move it to after a meeting? Should I let things calm down? Right? That is really kind of where, as humans, we separate ourselves from AI. AI does not know how to do that. And so being able to have authenticity and genuineness really comes from being able to bring your emotions and your full self to work. And so if you do mismanage your emotions, which I still do on occasion, make sure you're apologizing and being willing to talk about it. And that's really very critical to really breaking apart this myth and being okay with emotions at work. So, do we have any practical tips as we start to wrap up, Johanna?
Absolutely, we do. So I think that we've covered many of them at this point in time. And I'm just going to pull up, I believe I'm sharing the right screen, but I'm going to pull up the tips, right? So again, I think the one that you talked about right now is this recognition of your emotions, right? So it's acknowledging them, it's validating them, right? Because if we don't do that, then those emotions actually are the ones that are, controlling us versus us controlling them. And I also think it's important is to not judge the emotion because often we do that. We judge the emotion that we're having, right? As opposed to just accepting it and acknowledging it, making sure that we're saying, I am feeling this way. We don't have to judge it, right?
Yeah, so I think the second tip is one of the ones that you remind us of so well every time we get together, Johanna, and that is to take that pause before reacting. You talk about this a lot in your postings on LinkedIn and in the work you do, and just that deep breath, right? That pause, even if it's a split second, can make all the difference to creating a connection, an emotional connection that works, or to alienating someone.
Mhm.
And a third
Yeah,
tip.
the last one is about empathy, right? And I love that you highlighted all of this, right? It's about remembering that others are also bringing their full selves to work, right? So every single one of us is an emotional being. So it's not just about recognizing and acknowledging and validating our own emotions, it's doing that for those around you as well. So as leaders, it's important to check in with your team, just like that leader did for me, right? Ask your team members, how are they feeling, right? Don't judge them either in terms of their own emotions, but how are they feeling? And check in on them and check in on your peers and check in on yourself as well as the others around you.
Yeah. And so, again, in the chat, we're not going to share it with anyone. We're not going to call on you. But based on these action steps, which one are you going to put into action this week at work? Um, and then, what's one simple, judgmental question you can ask yourself this week to invite emotion in with intention? Sorry. But again, that emotion in to actually not check your emotion at the door, but to purposely bring it in. So, um, all right. So, Johanna, if people have more questions or want to follow up with us, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you are searching for a way to go deeper on your emotions and understand more about how they're showing up for you, both Marie and I are certified in that Energy Leadership Index, which creates an actual graph of how you're showing up emotionally and offers some insights in how you can shift your energy from more of sort of maybe the negative emotion towards more anabolic or positive emotion. As we talked about in the beginning, I work with corporate leaders and retirees, and Marie works with founders and aspiring entrepreneurs. You can reach us on LinkedIn. Both of us are active there. And you can also reach us on our websites. And Marie is going to be posting the links to those two websites in the chat. So feel free to reach out. We've highlighted that there's an opportunity for you to set up a complimentary coffee chat with either of us to discuss your emotions, to dive into this topic a little bit more. We also have a YouTube channel, so you can see the replay of this session out on the YouTube channel and all of the other sessions that we've hosted as well. And the last call out, Marie, for the next activity where folks can get involved and find us and follow us.
Yeah. So, as Johanna said, LinkedIn, but then we want to invite you to the last session of season one. And that is on November 20th, which is the Thursday before Thanksgiving. So a full week before Thanksgiving here in the US. That will be at noon Eastern time. And we are going to talk about the myth of the perfect time to start just ahead of the new calendar year. So
Wonderful. So we're right at time. We want to thank you all for being here with us, for your active engagement in the chat. We hope to see you again in one of our coffee chats or at the next session. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk again soon.
thank you all.